Well, tonight the principal is giving me a grade, so if you would please open with me to the book of Ecclesiastes. We looked last week at the first two chapters, and this is a long book, so I'm going to be flying through a lot of this. So we're in Ecclesiastes, that's right after Proverbs. I'm going to be flying through a lot of this, and it's not because it's unimportant, it's just because there's a lot to get through in this book. And so I'm hoping to bring out some of the main things that Solomon is conveying through these 12 chapters. But last week, we looked at the first two chapters, which serve as an introduction or a thesis to this book. And the general idea of those first two chapters was that both prudence and self-indulgence lead to vanity if we pursue them for their own sake, meaning if we pursue them as a means to an end themselves, instead of pursuing them as the God-given things that they are for the glory of God. They're both given by God, and they're both good, but they will never satisfy us. Toil, hard work, is wearying, and all that one works for will eventually get given to someone else. That was actually at the end of chapter 2, which we didn't really get to go into very much, but we'll see that again in chapter 6. The general idea is that working hard all your life is on its own vanity. It's a good thing, but if our goal is to see the fruit of our reward, the fruit of our toil, at the end of our life, we'll have to give it to someone else. And we don't know if that person that we give it to is going to be a fool, is going to be a wise person. We don't know if they're going to be righteous, if they're going to be unrighteous. All we know is that it will be given to someone else. A stranger will enjoy the fruits of our labor. So toil is vanity, is Solomon's point. And with that, it goes into chapter 3. And chapter 3 is one of the most beloved passages of Scripture, often quoted, and people often quote it out of context, not understanding the fuller context of Ecclesiastes. I don't know how many of you listen to jazz, but one of my favorite artists, Sean Martin, in his album, 7 Summers, which is an incredible album. He was a gospel and jazz piano player. He quoted this passage, said that his mom would read it over him. And the lesson that he learned from that was, and I quote, "My time is my time, and no one can take that away from me." So, although I appreciate his music, I appreciate the work he did for Kirk Franklin, he is not getting the actual picture of what this passage is talking about. Though what he says is good, it's not the point here. What Sean Martin was saying was that we all have a certain amount of time given to us, and what we do with that is ultimately a responsibility. So time is something that we should steward. But this passage is telling us something different, and so let's start reading in chapter 3, verse 1. "For everything there is a season, a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." Let's stop there and talk a little bit about this. To understand Solomon's point, we have to first understand what this word time means. What's not being said here is that there is a time that all these things happen, although that's true. But the word time there in Hebrew is et, and in the Greek Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it's kairos, which is not just time or season, it's appointed time, proper time. So when he's saying a time for every matter under heaven, he's saying that everything, every action that's done has its proper time, a time when it should be done. And we have to exercise wisdom in understanding what those times are. Some things that are on this list are controversial, but they are all proper in their time. Some might say that there should be no time to die. There should only be good things in this world, and that there should not be a time to kill. There should only be a time to heal. If you've ever seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge, the main character in that movie is a conscientious objector, a Christian man, and he refused to carry a gun. A lot of his fellow soldiers thought, if you don't carry a gun, if you don't fight for the people next to you, you are a traitor. Now, that's an incredible story. I'm not saying that that man was in the wrong. If you know what he did, if you know how many lives he saved, then you know the value in his worldview. However, if you're a soldier and you don't kill when it's proper, then the person next to you might suffer the consequences. So there's a proper time to do all things. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. If you are a farmer or a gardener, you know that if you plant a seed at the wrong time or you harvest at the wrong time, then you waste that seed or you get a fruit that's useless. I don't garden and I'm not a farmer, but I know that you're not going to see pumpkins in the store right now. If you were to plant strawberries at the wrong time, then you're just going to be wasting your money on seeds. So there is a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal. And we might say, I like the time to heal, I don't like the time to kill. But, and there are some Christian pacifists who would disagree with me on this interpretation. But you're charged with protecting your family, and so if someone breaks into your house with a deadly weapon, then sometimes it is warranted in order to protect the people you're charged with protecting, to kill. And there is a time to heal. There's a time to break down and a time to build up. I like reading this one because it makes me think of the times I've done construction or demolition work. And I always liked demolition a lot more than construction. It's kind of cathartic. It's fun to take a sledgehammer and just destroy a wall. But if your contractor is hired to build an extension or build a new bathroom or something, and they walk into your bedroom and just start taking down walls, that's not proper. There's a proper time for everything. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. And I want to pause here on this one for a minute. Because, as you might know, Billy Joel, in his song, Only the Good Die Young, said, I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. There's some stigma about being holy is being miserable. That's called masochism, by the way. And it's something that's been prevalent in church history and in paintings. I would be surprised if you're able to find a medieval painting of Jesus with a smile. He always had the most somber face, sad, kind of miserable Jesus. But in his time, he was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard because he would have feasts with his disciples. There's a time to laugh. At the same time, there is a time to weep. So there's another aspect of Christianity that says if you're miserable, then you're not having enough faith. I don't know where we got this idea that we can't have the full spectrum of human emotions in our Christian walk. Jesus wept. Jesus laughed. To say either one of those is a sin is to call Jesus a sinner. It doesn't make any sense, but yet it's what we hear. But there is a proper time. You wouldn't go to a funeral and say, cheer up. You wouldn't go to a wedding and say, knock it off, don't have fun. So there's a proper time for each. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away. My papa, my dad's dad, he grew up in a poor household, and he developed some habits that were really hard to break for him, and my grandma actually had to keep him in line sometimes. He had some tendencies of hoarding. He would open a candy wrapper, take the candy wrapper to the trash, and put it next to the trash. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. On Christmas, he would unfold wrapping paper. He would carefully take the tape off, and then he would save it for the next year. And you could always see the look in his face when all his grandkids would just rip the paper open. There is a time to cast away. Some things we keep that we don't need to. Some things we throw away that we do need to keep. And I'm speaking to myself here sometimes because I throw away money on fast food when I'm on the road, and it doesn't save any time. I could just take a few seconds to make myself a sandwich and pack it. And so that's a habit I've had to break slowly. There's a time to keep. Sometimes it's just throwing your money away in unwise ways. And sometimes there's a time to cast away. We hold on to things we don't need. Maybe because of sentimental value, but it's just a thing, right? It's a candy wrapper. We can throw it away. There is a time to tear and a time to sow. Here I just think of sometimes when my wife is doing a craft, and I just see her, she's been working on something, and then she just tears it. I'm like, what are you doing? And she said, I messed up. I need to restitch, or something like that. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. And this one is important. The book of Proverbs tells us a lot about being wise with your words. The words do have effects, consequences. The book of James, in James 3, he's talking about how the tongue is a small member of our body. It's a rudder. And what our tongue does has effects on us and the people we say things to. And that's terrifying, doing what I'm doing here, because he's talking to pastors. He's saying not very many of you should preach. And that just reminds me there is a time to keep silent. And that time is more often than not, I think. But at the same time, there's a time to speak. And when we see injustice in the world, when we see things that the Lord hates, we need to speak. And it would be improper to keep silent. There's a time to love and a time to hate. We like that first one, don't like that second one. And I don't want to give the wrong impression. We shouldn't hate people in the same way that we're commanded to love everybody. So we're commanded to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. So when it says a time to hate, that's not a time to be hateful. But there are things that the Lord hates that we should hate too. In the book of the Maccabees, there's there's a sacrifice being made on the altar with an unclean animal, and a zealous, a righteous anger comes over, and they go and they stop that sacrifice. The same word is used when Jesus cleanses the temple, flipping over tables. There is a time to hate. When we see abortion happening, the killing of the most innocent people in our society, if there's not a burning, a righteous anger that happens inside of you, then maybe something needs to be adjusted. These are things that the Lord hates. And if we don't hate, then that's improper. There's a time for war and a time for peace. And this one is difficult to wrap our heads around. And we're often unwise with what we think a righteous war would be. We've seen so many abuses of war by our own country and the countries around, but if we hadn't entered World War II, for example, then the cause of that was something that was worth fighting for. It would have been improper not to fight when there was such a grievous party trying to take over the world. Anyway, let's continue on. In verse 11, it says, everything is beautiful in its time. It says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. There is a time for everything every matter under heaven. Abuses of these things in this list does not mean that there is no proper time for them. If we continue on, verse 9 says, what gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do what is good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. There's an irony to toiling, because we read in Ecclesiastes 2, and we're reading here that it's vain. What we work for, we don't get to keep at the end of our lives. We go out with as much as what we came in with. However, it's a gift of God to enjoy our toil. It is good to work and good to enjoy your work. So even though it's vain, it is a gift of God. This phrase, God has put eternity into our hearts. This is a curious phrase, but the way that I read it is that we are curious and we are longing for knowledge of what has come before and after. We're longing for eternity, to live forever. And even the secular world understands this. Stephen Hawking, who's about as atheistic as can be, he was talking about humans and their curiosity. He says that we're probably the universe's best autobiographer, because we have this curiosity that isn't in any of the animals, to discover and to understand how the world works. God has put eternity into our hearts. I also think of C.S. Lewis. In his chapter on hope in Mere Christianity, he says, if I find in myself a desire so strong that nothing in this world can satisfy it, the most probable explanation is that I am built for another world. And he's talking about this hope that we have, that we might live on after this. God has put eternity into our hearts, yet we are not able to understand what came at the beginning of the universe what's going to be at the end, apart from what God has revealed to us. But we have this advantage over other animals that God has put eternity into our hearts. Where we don't have an advantage over the animals is described in this next passage, verse 16. Verse 18. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see themselves, that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for it all is vanity. We are mortal, but we long for something more. There is an irony to this as well, that apart from God, we can't be satisfied, and God has instilled this desire in us that we try to be satisfied with anything but God. So Solomon's conclusion, over and over, is that the best thing for us to do is to just enjoy our toil. If we continue on into chapter 4, he's talking about vanities that happen in our society. Chapter 4 says, Again, I saw all the oppression that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressor, there was power. I thought the dead, on the side of the oppressors, there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are under the sun. This is not a testament to the uselessness of life, because that's not Solomon's point. He's saying this so that we understand how evil really is. That it's better not to have ever seen it than to have existed. Then I saw that all the toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. This is envy. Envy is vanity. Envy is sin. However, what we do as humans, the progress we make, it comes from envy. We want to be better than the people around us. So our toil and progress come from competition and envy, yet it's all vanity. He talks in verse 9, he says, Two are better than one, because they have good reward for their toil. And if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. And woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Solomon is saying that there are good things in this world, and one of those things is community. We are told to live in community. We're told the benefits of living in community. This passage is often used in marriage ceremonies. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. That's a great point, that one person and their spouse are united by Christ, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. It's not, however, the main point of this. Solomon is saying that although community also, all things are vanity, community also is vanity, it is still better than being alone. When Adam was walking in the garden with God, he had perfect community with God. However, God said it's not good that man should be alone. Walking with God is not what we're walking with God is not the only thing we were created to do. We have to walk with God in community with other believers. It's not good than man is alone. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king, who no longer knew how to take advice, for he went from prison to the throne, though in his kingdom he had been poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth, who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end to all the people, all of whom he led, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity, and striving after wind. Wisdom is better than foolishness. However, the wise king and the foolish king both die, and in the next generations, there's no difference. There's no remembrance of the good ruler or the bad ruler. So Solomon's point comes in the beginning of chapter 5, that we must fear God because he is above all of us. And then he continues. That's not his final point, but that is his answer to the question, so what do we do about it? If we continue on, and I will end with this point, that vanity and honor and toil. So honor is vain and toil is vain. And if we look at chapter 5, verse 8, we see that. Chapter 5, verse 8 says, "If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields." No matter how high your office, you serve someone. If you're a king, you serve the people. If you're just a worker, then you serve your boss. Your boss serves the CFO serves the CEO. There will always be another person above you. And the highest office still answers to God. So we can never have enough honor. If we're searching for honor, we're always going to be answering to someone, and it will always be unsatisfying to us. If we continue, verse 10, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep." The phrasing of this is a little confusing. When goods increase, they increase who eat them, and what advantage has the owner but to see them with his eyes? But picture a business. A small business takes in some income, might not have very many employees, might just be their family. A bigger business takes in more income and also has to employ more people. As goods increase, they increase who eat them. So as crops are growing and you have more and more land, you have to have more people to pluck up those crops and more people to feed. And what advantage has the owner but to see them with his eyes? This is saying that if you have great wealth, great employees, you might be able to see how much you're making. You don't get to enjoy it. It all has to go to the people you're paying to gather that money in. It's vain to love wealth. And if you love wealth, that's all you'll get. And you will not be satisfied with that. So riches do not satisfy, and we can never enjoy them. Chapter 6 goes back to a point we addressed briefly at the beginning of this. It says, "There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. What you work for, you'll have to give away at the end of your life. You don't get to enjoy it. That's vanity. It is a grievous evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he." You have to be satisfied with what God gives you. There is a verse in here that I had to study a little harder because it's so confusing. So if you would turn back now to chapter 4, verse 5. It says, "The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh." What does that mean? Well, he's saying that if you don't work, you're going to wither away. If you fold your hands and refuse to work, even though toil is vanity, you will eat your own flesh. You will wither away because God created us to work. However, verse 6, immediately after this, it says, "Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil, and a striving after the wind." So what does that mean? A handful of quietness, 2 hands full of toil? It's confusing language. But in the context of all of these chapters, what's being said here is that we have to work, but it is vain, and it's toil. The solution to that is a handful of quietness, which is contentment. We have to be content with the good things in life. Otherwise, we have 2 hands full of toil. We'll never be satisfied. We're going after riches, and there will always be more riches to get. And that goes back to a striving after the wind. That phrase we've heard over and over in this. That picture we talked about last week, that striving after the wind, you might catch some, and you keep going, trying to catch more, and it's gone. So I'm reminded of another Billy Joel quote, "Working too hard can give you a heart attack, But it makes me think of this Greek mythological figure, Sisyphus. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Sisyphus, but he was punished for eternity by having to roll a stone up a hill. And he could get it up to the top of the hill. I mean, he could see that his efforts did do something. But at the end of that, when he got it to the top of the hill, it slipped and rolled down to the bottom of the hill. And that was his task for all of eternity. A philosopher asked one time, "Is Sisyphus happy?" And his conclusion was, "One must imagine that he is." But in this book, we ask the question, why? Why must Sisyphus be happy? And Sisyphus represents all of us toiling our whole lives for something that we can't ultimately keep. And the answer comes over and over in this, that it is a good gift of God to enjoy our toil, to find enjoyment in our toil. So why is Sisyphus happy? He wouldn't be apart from the gift that God has given us. Even though God has given us eternity in our hearts, he also gives us the ability to be satisfied with what we do day to day. And that is a good gift of God. But we have to trust in God's plan. Otherwise, we're searching after things that will not satisfy us. So in conclusion, we have to trust God and find enjoyment in the things that he has appointed for us. It is a gift of God to find enjoyment in work, and it is proper to trust and to fear him. He has made everything beautiful in its time, but we must enjoy everything that he gives us on God's terms and not on ours. Let's pray. Dear God, we're grateful for these words of wisdom that you imparted through Solomon. We're grateful that you have put eternity into our hearts, that you made us curious and to desire to be with you for eternity. We ask that as we walk through our lives, as we live every day this week, that we are reminded that nothing in this world can satisfy us. And if we try to find satisfaction in the things of this world, they will ultimately fail. So we ask that you satisfy us and that you keep us fixed on you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.